Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn Senior News Editor for Job Searches and Careers. I'm so happy you're joining us today because we have such a great topic to discuss, but also because it's just going to be a really wonderful conversation with someone who has a really fascinating job. And as always, I want to ask you to first introduce yourselves in the comments. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from, maybe a little bit about your career, your job search, a little bit about whatever's going on in your professional life. And then what I want you to do is connect with each other. Networking is the cornerstone of a successful job search and really a successful career. And there's no better time to start than right now. Maybe you see someone who is working in your area and you want to job search together. Maybe you see someone who works in a field that you want to get into. So make sure that you're building those connections, reaching out to each other, maybe job searching together or talking about your career or industry. It's really important to build those connections. And like I said, now is a great time to do that, especially with all of you in the same event on the same LinkedIn Live. I want to give a quick hello to Rashida, Joyce, Scott, Mohammed, joining us all in the stream. It's so wonderful to have you. Keep introducing yourselves, and we'll get to your questions also in just a little bit. So make sure you get those in the comments as well. And if you miss any part of this conversation, don't worry, because you can watch a replay of it right after we're done having a conversation. And I want to bring on our special guest for today, Shannon Sisler, who is the Chief People Officer at Crocs, joining us all the way from Colorado. Welcome, Shannon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And I'm so happy that you're here because I was telling you before we started, I'm a big fan of Crocs. And actually, I wear a pair every day because it's great for going about my business. And even I just had ankle surgery, and it was like the best shoe ever for recovery when I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the best shoe for me to get around with. So I really appreciate your products. And I guess, can you start off by telling us a
He just went frozen. Sorry, Andrew, you cut out a little bit.
Shannon there?
Yep. Yeah, I'm here. You froze a little bit. So just rephrase that for me? Sorry, I lost
sorry
you.
about that.
Yeah, sorry.
The wonders of the internet. So Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about your job and your role at Crocs?
Sure, absolutely. So I serve as our Chief People Officer, which means I get to lead global HR and facilities for the whole global company. And also, I have a new exciting role, which is helping with an integration of a newly acquired brand, Hey Dude, which is a casual footwear company that we just announced closure on that deal last night. So I'm helping with all those different areas in our company. Okay, he's gone.
Oh.
Andrew, are you there? He's frozen.
Sorry about that. As always, the internet is a wonderful place.
I don't know about this metaverse they keep telling us about. I'm not sure I want to live there, but let's try it.
Exactly. So yeah, so thank you so much for telling us a little bit about that. And then, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about too is Crocs, your motto, because it's come as you are. And can you tell us a little bit about how you interpret that for yourself, and also how it applies to the wider company?
Yeah, so come as you are is definitely our motto. It's all about self-expression, being your own unique self. And I think, this is probably the first time in my career that I really can say I genuinely can be who I feel comfortable being on a day-to-day basis. And that word comfort, I think, is really important to us. We've got associates in 20 different countries around the globe. And, I think they bring a lot of unique qualities to the workplace, and we want to find a place that they can do that. So it's really important. And the more you spend time in this type of a culture, the more you really get excited about it.
Yeah, such a good point. And speaking of all around the world, I do want to say hello to a few more people who are joining us in the stream. We have Guy from Ontario, we have Sadia from Connecticut, Amanda from Mississippi, Karen from Arkansas, Tom from the Bay Area, Raphael from Chicago, Julia from Denver, so not too far from where you are. We have John from New Jersey, Jordan from my home state of Pennsylvania, and Jacqueline from Miami. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And, the next thing I want to ask about is, how do you encourage that sort of culture among your employees? Because it's one thing to sort of say, okay, our motto's come as you are, we want to live that. But a lot of times people are resistant to that, and they sometimes think, hey, it's still a place of business. I worry about being myself. How do you encourage them to come as they are?
I think it starts with the very first interaction we have with our workforce, right? I think, we're fortunate that we have a product that really allows you to personalize it. You can literally say what you're interested in on your feet. We have our little gibbets charms that you put on our shoes, and you can tell us your favorite professional team, or, what movement you're focused on, or even just the type of food you like to eat. And so it really starts with that product experience that people have. But I think we also, in the interview process, really ask people, tell us about your unique self and what does that look like for you and what's important to you. And it's a very casual environment, which I think that just promotes people feeling comfortable in the workplace. And that's something that we really strive to keep, because we think when you can be your own unique self, we think you can really thrive and do your best work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great approach, because it's always one of those things where I think people need permission to sort of feel and engage with that idea of saying, okay, I could be a little bit more relaxed in the space. And speaking of that, a lot of job seekers, they go into their job search thinking they need to play a role. And I, just from interviewing people, being a job seeker from time to time myself, there's always that sort of thing where you walk in and you don't feel like yourself because you're trying to impress everyone. And what really is, the best way for job seekers to embrace themselves? Should they play a role? How do they walk that line? What's your advice for job seekers?
Yeah, I think we've all faced that as you walk into that interview, right? Do I play the buttoned up role? I'm perfect. I got it all together. Or do you show up and say, look, this is what I'm great at. These are some of the opportunities that I'm learning and growing in. This is what I'm interested in. And what I can say is that when you show up your authentic self, I think you end up finding the right role. And it's easy to find yourself by playing the other role that you think is really important. Sometimes you end up in a job that might not be the best fit for you, and ultimately that has consequences 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. And so I think it's really important that you show up. You're a good professional self version, but I think you really just need to say, hey, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm learning to grow, and be introspective and share that. And that might be a little bit more vulnerable than other people might imagine in an interview process, but I think that's important.
Yeah. And again, I just want to take a moment to say hello to some people who are joining us. We have Malcolm from Georgia, Patricia from New York, Tara from Indianapolis, Victor from New Jersey, Amit from India, Leonardo from Brazil, Charisse from North Carolina, Shamila from South Africa, Galetta from Texas, Tracy from Canada, and Pablo from Houston. Welcome to all of you. We're talking about being your authentic self at work, and also from the employer side, how that works. You're joined by Shannon Sisler, who is the Chief People Officer at Crocs. And Shannon, one thing that I wonder is, obviously not all employers are probably as welcoming or open as Crocs. So if you're saying to yourself, listen, I really want an employer who can let me be me, how do you find those companies? How do you find that culture fit for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's tough. It does take some work on the job seeker side, right? And I think you have to do your homework. And that homework can take a lot of different forms. It can be everything from looking at the employment branding that they're putting in the marketplace, look at what consumers are saying about that brand, read some of the social feeds and what they say about their organization. And then if you can, connect with people in places like LinkedIn to ask them, hey, what is it really like to work at this organization? I think the more input you can get from lots of different sources, and you can't believe everything you read on the internet, right? But get that input and see what it really feels like to work there. And then in your interview process, I think it's important, not only are they interviewing you to see if you're a fit for a job, but as a job seeker, you're interviewing them to see if it's a good fit for you. And it's when you have that win-win situation that it's going to be a really good fit.
Yeah. And I just want to remind everyone who's joining us in the stream to get your questions into the stream, because we're going to be taking them in just a little bit. Shannon obviously has a ton of experience when it comes to hiring teams, hiring people, and putting great teams together and creating a workplace that is accepting. So make sure you get those questions in, and we'll be taking them in just a little bit. Shannon, my next question for you is, obviously, I think a lot of people, we hear about being yourself, and that could be different for each person. Can you give us some examples of how you and the employees at Crocs actually bring their authentic selves to work and show up like that?
Yeah, I think, we see that in a lot of different areas in our organization. If I look at our workforce, we have people in retail stores, distribution centers, and corporate office jobs. And so I think how they show up their own unique self really changes by the work environment. Like I said, it always starts with the shoes. That seems to be a common equation at Crocs and what story you're telling on your feet. But I also think it's, we are a company that's empowered by our employees. We have what we call a Kaya Council, which is our Come As You Are councils. Those are groups of people around the globe that are really about making this an inclusive environment. They take on lots of different tough topics and really help people kind of expand their perspectives on inclusivity and self-expression. I think that's been really successful with our workforce and just trying to give people a way to engage in different ways. And we also, speaking of engagement, do a lot of listening with our employees to see what's important to them and then try to cater our communications and our offerings and the way we, work with our associates to meet those needs.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now in the workforce is that companies are really big on making sure that their employees are happy. They don't want to lose them. And they also want to make sure that their employees stay productive in this really, time of flux where some people might be in the office, sometimes they're out of the office, sometimes they're only in the office or at home. How does Crocs keep their finger on the pulse of employee satisfaction? How do you stay in tune with your employees?
Yeah, so we do regular listening surveys. We use a tool called Glint to go out there and listen to our workforce. And we typically have, 80-90% of our workforce participate in those type of surveys. And boy, they like to tell us what's going on, which is awesome because we can do something about it. We're fortunate that the last few years our engagement has been in the top 10%, which is great to hear, but it wasn't always like that. And we had to do a lot of work and listening to evolve our practices to meet the needs of those folks. And then what we really think is that engagement happens at the micro level, right? It is one associate working with another one. It might be at a retail store on the warehouse floor. And those people are coming together saying, hey, if we did X, Y, and Z, we think this could be a better workplace experience. We want to encourage those type of conversations because it's when we can change your day-to-day experience that we think ultimately you'll be more engaged. So we encourage a lot of those kind of, in-team discussions to say, how can we drive better engagement?
That's really good, and I'm sure that also helps connect with customers too, because obviously they're the ones who keep everything going, and you want to make sure you're serving them. So it's good to say, hey, if you're at the retail store, what are they saying? What do they like? What they gravitate toward? And it also, so I assume that sort of helps everything all around to sort of say, hey, we're serving our customers better, our employees are happy, and this whole machinery just basically gets to go on like a well-oiled machine, right?
Absolutely. And we see a lot of tenure in our retail workforce because I think they really like working there. They come together as a team. I think our store managers in the US, their tenure is almost 5 years that they've been running those stores is the average. And so that's a testament to who we are as a culture and that it's a good experience and people can grow with us. So those are the type of things that we measure to make sure it's a good place to work.
Yeah, and we were talking before the show that actually Crocs and LinkedIn in New York are neighbors, probably one of your flagship stores. And it's funny because we see a lot of stores in the Herald Square area come and go, but Crocs have been there forever, basically.
Yeah, and I think last time I was at the Croc store on 34th, which was December, there was a line out the door, which I was very pleasantly surprised to see. So it's awesome.
Definitely. And we have a great question here. We're going to be taking questions from the audience now. So again, please get your questions in if you're watching. We have one from Tamara that is really good and goes to the heart of what we're talking about today. I've asked about work-life balance and was advised it's not a good question. How do you ask if a company supports self and mental health? And I think a lot of people, they sometimes have these questions, what is your mental health policies, work-life balance, those sort of things. How do you look into those?
Yeah, I do actually think that's an appropriate question, especially in today's world. I think that the world has evolved a lot in the last couple of years with the pandemic, and you're starting to see personal and professional really blend together more. So I do think it's appropriate to say, I'm a really hard worker. I also am committed to my family and friends and myself, right? And how I'm personally staying productive. So tell me what that looks like at this organization and how you keep people well. And I think that when people are well, the company performs better. So I think you have to put that question out there. Once again, I would go back and look at the research too, look at some of the comments that are out there about the workplace and get some more information.
Yeah. And we have a bunch of questions coming in about ageism, and obviously that also plays
Yeah.
in with being who you are, because sometimes people who are older in the workforce feel like they have to sort of fake it to get hired, unfortunately. And one of the questions we have is from Greg, and he says, "I'm an older worker with some broad experience. I'm starting to feel like the younger people who are interviewing me don't think I'll fit in. Any tips with dealing with that?"
Yeah, I think it's a real issue, right? Ageism is something that we really look out for. And I think, that's something that I think is okay to address with people and say, look, I'm coming to this role because I'm interested in contributing this way. We find that some of our older workers are actually some of the most loyal, productive workers we have. They're also some of the most highly engaged in our workforce. So I think really talking to people about the wisdom you bring, the experiences you have, the fact that, you're going to be loyal to that job, you're excited to be there. I think, showing up as your authentic self, if you've got that stamp of age, you've got a great experience probably behind you that some of the newer folks just coming up don't have yet. So I think that can be an advantage. You just have to think of it that way.
Definitely. And, and it's one thing that I hear from a lot of people, and we're seeing a lot of companies do returnship programs or programs where people can re-enter the workforce, is that when they bring people who may have even a large gap on their resume, they find that the people who enter who are older tend to be, like you said, more loyal. They tend to have things in their lives figured out. So they're more reliable, and actually they tend to be more valuable employees in the long run. So companies, I think, are waking up to the fact, like you said, that some of the older employees are actually the most loyal. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite employee profiles is that, parent that maybe has a gap on their resume, but they've been running a busy household. Maybe they've been running the PTA at their school or doing, community service. And when you really ask those people about the experiences they've had in the last few years, they're amazing what they've coordinated and gotten done and led in the community. And so thinking about how you can take those experiences and transition them to the workplace, I think is a great opportunity and something to be highlighting, not necessarily hiding, which I think sometimes people want to do. And I would say put it out there. Like, you are a leader in your community and family, and you got to show up with those strengths and opportunities to share with people.
Such a good point. And we actually have a question right on this topic from Cindy. And she says, "I've been working per diem as needed for the last 10 years while raising my daughter. Some employers don't like that. How can I overcome this?"
I think it goes back to what I just said, which is you've got to say, look, these type of per diem things that I've done, I've seen different work environments. I'm flexible. I can learn things fast. Like, find what your 2 or 3 things are that those type of experiences have given you, and be able to quickly articulate them for that interview to say, hey, it might look like I've had lots of different opportunities that I've participated in, but guess what I have to give you as a result of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really important to sort of be upfront and address. If you feel like there's something that's weighing on your mind, it's okay to bring it up. And sometimes it makes things a little bit easier for yourself and the interviewer, and especially on your end where you could sort of finally breathe and let that happen. Um, Speaking of experience, we have a question here from Adam, and I think a lot of people run into this. How do you get the job for the experience when the jobs always emphasize more experience? So I think a lot of people, they sometimes hear, it's an entry level job, but you need at least 3 years experience or something like that. What is your suggestion for people who are sort of doing that equation of how much experience is really enough to get this job?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you have to remember everybody has to start somewhere, right? So for those people that are just coming out of school or just joining the workforce, you got to start somewhere. And quite frankly, you have to earn your stripes, right? You got to go to an organization, and maybe it's not the dream job as your first job, but get in there, and whatever job it is, I can tell you, I made a lot of copies when I started out in my career in consulting, but guess what? I read them. And I read those presentations, and then I started to make them. And next thing you know, I was presenting them. So I think you've got to start somewhere. And, and you can also put your resume in for jobs that maybe on paper it says 3 years and you only have 2. That's okay. Put your resume in anyway. The worst thing that can happen is they say no and you get a rejection letter or a phone call. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. You're not going to have a 100% hit rate, nor do you need a 100% hit rate. You need to be in meaningful job experience. And that really just takes one for the current time, and then you'll go on to the next one. So go out there and start somewhere.
Yes, in fact, I just had a friend who was asking me about that. They wanted to apply for a job, but the minimum experience didn't align with their resume. And I asked them, "Well, could you do that job?" And they said, "Oh, of course I could." And I said, "Okay, well then that's what you need." So I said, "Take a chance." And I said, "Maybe they'll say no, but it's still worth a shot." So
Yeah,
hopefully other
absolutely.
people follow that. And we have a really good question here from Jacqueline, and she says, "I recently started a new job, and I'm feeling overwhelmed with the workload. How should I approach my manager without sounding like I can't handle it?"
Yeah, I think that is very common. And with organizations, they have lots of people coming and going right now. And so I think sometimes we're putting people into jobs where it's like sink or swim. And that's super tough, right? I think one of the things I always encourage people to talk with their managers about is prioritization and have a conversation about what's urgent versus what's important and how do you focus on the right priorities. And so you can have a conversation if you do it in that way that's very structured where you leave with a good prioritized list versus just showing up saying I'm overwhelmed, what do I do, right? Try to write it down, get constructive about what you're trying to balance, get some guidance on what needs to get done first and why, and maybe and be willing to shift those priorities based on what the organization needs. And then play it through and take the initiative. Have that conversation often with your manager. I have people on my team that literally every week we look at their urgent important list and we decide to move priorities around so that they can manage and deal with their personal and professional lives and we get everything done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea because sometimes, I think people they get the job, they have their task, and all of a sudden they sort of say, "Okay, what am I actually doing?" And it's so helpful to get it down on paper to see where everything fits in, and it's good to see the puzzle sort of laid out in front of you. And on this topic too, we have a question from Christine who says, "Is it okay to ask for further details in an interview when a job description says other duties as assigned? Sometimes those other duties take up a lot of work time."
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's okay to ask that. I think you could say, hey, I saw at the bottom of the job description, it says other duties, which is HR just playing it safe, by the way. But ask, like, what are the other things that I could maybe get involved with this job? I think that's a perfectly acceptable question.
Yeah, sort of like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Et cetera, et
Just
cetera. What does et cetera mean? I have a lot of other duties as assigned, right? So we all do.
yeah. And Jim also wants to ask, and this goes sort of back to the idea of how do you really know what a company is like? And he wants to know, how does one know the reputation and authenticity of an organization? And I think a lot of people, they'll look at the website and they'll say, "Wow, this looks really great," but it's not necessarily a window inside what they do because a lot of that tends to be PR dressing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you have to get in there and see for your own eyes if you can get into the physical workspace, right? I think you can often tell a lot just by, where people go get coffee, where they sit and have lunch together, what it feels like to be in that work environment. I think if it's a virtual work environment, it's a little harder to do that. But what I would say is, can you be exposed to various types of people in the organization throughout your interviewing process? Maybe not as they are interviewing you, but could you have a quick virtual cup of coffee with someone on the team just to get their experiences of what it's like working there? I think sometimes those can be some of the most insightful things you can do in the interview process.
Got it. Yeah. And, and we have a question from Jacob, and this is also something that I think we're seeing now in the workforce a lot more frequently, which is people changing jobs quite rapidly. So maybe once every year, once every 2 years. And Jacob says, "Does it look bad that I keep changing jobs? I'm just trying to find my place in life and find the right career path for me." What's your advice for someone who feels like they're just keep changing from one to the other?
Yeah, I think it's tough, right? Because on one hand, I think as employers, we know that the time that you're going to spend with an organization is coming down, and so we want to provide meaningful experiences, and we know that those experiences might be shorter in nature. But with that said, I think it's really important as an individual to step back and say, why do I keep changing jobs? Am I running away from something? Am I running to something? And that's a really important question to ask yourself. But then the other piece I would encourage you to think about if you're someone that keeps, going to job is really sit down and get familiar with what are your personal strengths. And I find that when you really get clear on these are the type of things I enjoy, that I'm good at, and then you think about crafting a job search strategy around those strengths, all of a sudden you start looking at different types of jobs. And often when it's aligned with who you are and what you like doing, if you like doing something, most likely you're going to be a lot better at it. So really take time to be introspective and think about what are my strengths and how could those be leveraged in the workplace.
That's such a great piece of advice, and it's a really great exercise. And we have a question here from Laura that is going back to the idea of how much experience you need, and basically she's asking, how do you handle in an interview if you fall short in certain areas? So how do you sort of not explain away, but how do you actually address those gaps in your experiences?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's okay to say, I have a gap in that area. I haven't had an opportunity to do that. So, an example I know I look for in some of our more senior roles is, do you have global experience? And oftentimes people haven't had that opportunity. And so, but what I like is when a candidate will just admit that in the interview, but then tell me, but let me tell you how I've been able to adjust to new cultures or learn new things fast, or give me some type of reason why I should believe that if I put you in a stretch assignment or a stretch role that you're going to perform well. So I think go ahead and lean into it and don't try to fake it. If you try to fake, I have experience in this area and you don't, it's just going to go downhill in that interview. So lean into it and say, you know what, but I have confidence that I will figure it out and I will learn fast.
Yeah. And something that's happening obviously right now in the workforce is it tends to be a tight labor market. A lot of people are moving around. Employers want to keep employees. And we have a couple questions here about how people can have sort of interviews with their current employers to maybe get a raise or a promotion. And do you have any advice for that? Because I think a lot of people, they are sometimes hesitant, but they also want to make sure that maybe if they still want a promotion, they want a raise, that they don't miss an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we do at Crocs is what we call stay interviews. And we sit down with people to say, hey, what's it going to take to get you to stay at this organization? What's important to you? I like to think of yourself as a free agent, right? Each year you're kind of up for a new gig, and it's got to be meaningful for you to stay at that organization for the next duration of time. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to sit down with your manager and say, as I'm charting the next year or 2 years of my career, this is what I'm hoping to get out of it. How do you think my skills and interests can align with how the organization is changing? And is there a good fit there? And have that conversation. And you don't have to do it in a threatening way. If I don't get $1 more an hour or this big of an increase or title, I'm going to leave. But do it in a way that says, these are the experiences I'm looking to have. This is the contribution I'm looking to make. And what can that mean for me as a role and growth going forward? So I think you just have to do it in a solution oriented way. But I encourage people to have those conversations. And if you stay quiet and then just all of a sudden leave, there's oftentimes a lot that the employer could have done to make it a better workplace for you. But quite frankly, they just didn't know. So you got to tell them.
Yeah, and especially now, I think there's employers out there who are really willing to negotiate and
Yeah.
say, listen, we don't want to lose you. We don't want to look and train for someone else. So it's easier for them to maybe give you some extra money than actually start the process all over again to replace
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
And then, a question that comes up, you mentioned, is, talking to people within an organization, seeing what it's really like. And Rashida is asking, how do you network with current employees at your interested organization? So, what do those outreaches do you think look like?
Yeah, I think that's super important to get to know people outside of your function or geography or things like that. That's something we try to do in our learning development programs, is find organic ways that people can come together and get to know each other. But, I also think going to your leaders and saying, hey, I want to do some networking within the organization. Are there one or two people you can connect me with to do things? I think the other great advice I would give you is in the sense of, I watch people that do a good job of asking for special projects. And those special projects can be an opportunity to work with different people. Maybe they're a little bit outside of your typical responsibilities. I think that's also a great way to get to know new people.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good piece of advice. And then, really, lastly, we have a question here from Anthony that I think applies to so many people, because even though it's a good job market, people do get rejection letters, and it doesn't mean that everyone is just finding a job the next day that they start looking. Anthony says, how do you overcome so many rejection letters? What is your suggestion for job seekers to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to keep going. You just need that one letter that says you got the job. You can get 100 no's, but if you get the right yes, then it will be worth it. And so you can't give up. I think it's really important to have a support network around you, have other people that are going through job search processes so that you know you're not alone. You're not the only person getting the no answers, or have, people that have successfully just been through the process and can give you some tips and tricks. But surround yourself with people that are going to support you. They want you to win. And when you're having a hard day, be vulnerable enough to say, wow, this is really starting to wear me down. It's tough. I need some support to keep going. I think that's how we all stay well and healthy. And you're not alone. This is normal. And you just got to hang in there and look for that one right job.
Yes. And speaking of hanging in there, I want to thank you again, Shannon, for hanging with me while I had my little internet problem. So I appreciate it.
No problem. No problem.
And yeah, and thank you so much for joining us. We got so much out of this conversation, and I know the audience did too. We had so many questions, so many viewers, and I hope they were following along to see your LinkedIn profile at the bottom and that they gave you a follow.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all out there for joining us too. I'll be off next week. I have jury duty. So I'm going to be off serving my civic duty, but I will be back the week after that with a special guest. We will have Deepak Chopra. He'll be talking about his new book, Abundance, The Inner Path to Wealth. And basically it's talking about, people being motivated by better pay, bigger salaries, more possessions, but will that really fix the problems or issues in your life? So we'll dig into how to find fulfillment, and that is March 4th at noon Eastern time. And again, that's with Dr. Deepak Chopra. He'll be joining us and answering your questions live. And as always, we have a ton of great content on the LinkedIn news page, which is where you're watching the show right now. And on Monday, we are having President's Day in the United States, so we won't be having a show then. But on Thursday, February 24th, my colleague Caroline Fairchild will be talking about equity in the healthcare industry. It's such an important topic, and that is with City Block Health co-founder Toyin Ajayi. Again, that's Thursday, February 24th at 3 p.m. And that's with Toyin Ajayi. And my colleague Caroline Fairchild will be talking to her. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, we'll be back on March 4th with the next episode of Get Hired Live. A big thank you to Shannon for joining us. You could rewatch this episode by just clicking refresh. I want to give a quick shout out to Wes, Taisha, Gianna, and everyone behind the scenes who makes this show possible. And again, thank you for joining us. And until next time, please stay safe. The pandemic is still a thing. People are getting sick, but you could only get hired. You can only be a good candidate if you're safe and healthy enough to do so. So take care of yourself. And until next time, best of luck.